But you see this amazing tipping point. As recently as 5 years ago, only small companies, for the most part, were moving to the cloud. Now it has moved all the way up to major enterprises.
Hi, so I've got here today Alan Masarek, CEO of Vonage at Holmdel, Vonage Technology Center.
That's correct. We're thrilled to be here at our Vonage Technology Center. So it's a pleasure to be with you, Sai. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here. So I have a question before we start, and this really bugged me a bit during the time that I've learned about you and about the company, and that's you came from Google,
Right.
Vonage.
Yep.
Why?
Well, first of all, if that's the only thing that's bugged you, that would be exceptional. But in all seriousness, I came here, what excited me when I was presented this opportunity when I was at Google, and I had gotten to Google from selling my earlier company to them back in 2012. So I was a director in the Chrome and Apps group, and I was very involved in the whole rollout of what is now today G Suite. We used to call it Google for Enterprise. What intrigued me about coming here was the opportunity to take this almost iconic consumer brand company that built this amazing level of awareness around providing residential phone service, and how you could take the brand and the network asset, as well as the cash flows from consumer, candidly, and use that to pivot into business. I always look at markets the same way. You sort of sit back and you say, is that market worth winning? And do you have the assets that give you an ability to win it? So when you look at the broader business communications market, it's a massive TAM growing very quickly. And then even when you look at the competitive set, I found the big companies in the set were pretty unfocused. Most of the competitors were smaller companies, had less brand awareness, less sort of national scope, less profitability. So you have this huge TAM, a surmountable competitive set, and then you have these assets from consumer that we felt we could bring to bear to win. And that's exactly what we've been executing on. That's what we saw when I was at Google. That's what I came here to do.
So you're actually staying in this area between consumer and enterprise. You did that at Google with the acquisition, and now here at Vonage, moving from consumer to businesses.
That's correct. So the company that I sold to Google focused really in the prosumer and enterprise segment. So we were a productivity solution that individuals would use and corporations would use. Here, we obviously have moved very specifically from our roots in consumer and residential, focused in business. When we began that pivot, we started with small companies because that's where the action was in the move to cloud. But now we've moved very, very purposefully up market to larger and larger corporate customers. Last year, we signed what I think is the largest deal ever done in cloud communications. It's the largest residential real estate company in the United States. 21,000 corporate seats moving from prem to cloud, and another 125,000 franchisee seats.
What gets you up in the morning?
Well, this morning at 5 o'clock, my alarm clock. But what I'm excited about, and I've continued, the reason I came here to begin with is I want to build a remarkable company here. It's not just the transformation from moving from a residential-focused company to a business-focused company. We're clearly executing on all those elements, whether it's the technology platform itself, sales execution, the post-sales experience we provide our customers, all those things that we're doing. But as important, and in some respects, if not more important, it's the cultural transformation as well. What I find that is really sort of stimulating to me is to create that switched on Silicon Valley mindset culture. I like to think that we're a $1 billion startup, is what we talk about it. Last year, we finally crossed the $1 billion in revenue threshold. But I want to have the agility, the speed, the openness, the transparency, the honesty, all that in order for Vonage to be, the way I describe it is I want Vonage to be that destination place to work, the way Google was. Everybody celebrates when they get a job at Google. I want them to feel the same way getting a job here.
Okay. And you're a cloud communication company at the end of the day. And cloud communication in the last few years has got a lot of attention, especially this last year. How come most of the businesses today are still on-premise when it comes to their communication needs?
I think the move on the communication side, the move to cloud has happened more slowly than CRM and ERP and HRM software, things like that. I think because the nature of dial tone has been about as reliable as the sun coming up tomorrow, and there's a great degree of risk that's associated with it. Companies sit back and they say, "My goodness, it works. I don't necessarily want to change it." Now the reality is, when you move from the traditional prem-based solutions and the old PSTN network and such to IP-based, cloud-based solutions, you have infinite scalability, much more functionality. The whole notion of unified communications and communications platform as a service all stems from that. But I just think there's been a fear factor that has caused it to migrate to the cloud more slowly than some of these other verticals. But you see this amazing tipping point. As recently as 5 years ago, only small companies, for the most part, were moving to the cloud. Now it has moved all the way up to major enterprises. And there are just example after example of other huge companies, global multinationals moving to the cloud. It's sort of no longer in dispute that cloud will supplant prem. It's just like anything, takes time.
What triggers them to do that shift, that migration from on-prem to cloud?
I think the trigger point, there's several trigger points. A couple of them are the comfort of moving to cloud. The cloud was scary just a few years ago, and so it was to be avoided by bigger companies. But beyond that, it's the productivity that they can get. Every company out there is going through their own digital transformation of one form or the other. Everybody's looking over their shoulder, scared to death of the more digitally transformed competitor has a bullseye on their back, is coming after their business. Obviously, we can always cite the example of physical retail stores versus Amazon e-commerce. That notion of digital transformation, everyone has to go through, and I think what's happened is, up until very recently, communications has been sort of the underappreciated element of digital transformation. I always have this sort of visual metaphor in my mind that you can picture somebody on the old kind of black rotary dial phone talking to a colleague saying, "We got to get that e-commerce site up," not realizing that the problem itself, or a major piece of the problem itself, is their communications infrastructure, how people work differently with one another, how they collaborate, et cetera, et cetera. All those elements of what we're providing with these cloud communication solutions are fueling their digital transformations. I think that's now being seen, and folks are more aware of that all the time, and that's why you're seeing kind of the everything change and move to the cloud so quickly.
Now, yes, I actually agree. When you look at the communication market, for me it's like a Venn diagram.
Yep.
Different parts of it. There's unified communication and then contact centers, and recently we see APIs, these CPaaS, communication platform as a service. When I look at what competitors do in this space, your competitors in unified communications, they end up going and doing something or adding stuff in the contact center. And then when they look at the APIs, they usually go and say, well, we'll just put an APIs on whatever we do because,
Right.
2018, everybody uses an API on top of what they
Right.
do. But you did something differently. You went and acquired a company called Nexmo and had their APIs, haven't even touched it in a way, and you left that to be a separate part of the business, or a business all on its own, with and without relationship to what you're doing in unified communications.
The reason that we bought Nexmo is we have a view of what business communications is and will be that's different than most. Most in the example have hosted PBX, which has really been the principal use case of UCaaS, or hosted contact center, which has been the principal use case of CCaaS. In our view, those are just applications. Hosted PBX, moving your prem-based PBX to the cloud, is a big TAM unto itself, but it's not necessarily an industry. The same applies to contact center. It's not an industry. It's simply an application or a use case, which is really large and really important. But at the same token, the whole now new acronym of CPaaS, Communications Platform as a Service, says, well, there are other elements of communications that I want to simply program in to my workflow, my mobile app, my business process, my website, what have you, that have nothing to do with the contact center or the PBX. Our view has been that we're building a communications platform company. The whole notion of it, it's a microservices architected platform. So we're taking the Nexmo platform and our own Vonage Business Cloud platform and bringing those together. We refer to that internally as one Vonage. From that microservices architecture, you're just going to serve customers in those big use cases. So whether you bundle several hundred of those microservices together in a use case called PBX or in a use case called contact center, or sell them one at a time that just get embedded into something else via these software APIs, it doesn't matter. It's the same platform, you're just feeding where the needs are the greatest. And the notion of this is that there's not different industries, UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS. It's simply communication elements, how they get deployed. The way I like to think about it is I go back to the music industry. We grew up, here's songs, and we could buy it only one way, packaged, pre-published on an album. Apple came along and the cloud and said, I'm going to unbundle the model and you can buy a song one at a time. And then streaming services and subscription services have come along and the ability to mash up your music. They're just different delivery models of the same song. It's the way I think about cloud communications. There are communication elements, audio, video, messaging. Whether you package them in big applications like PBX or unbundle them as microservices, which is the CPaaS model, doesn't really matter. It's just where the needs are the greatest. Because at the end of the day, communications only serves a purpose. Does it make the company more productive? Does it connect my customers in a more personalized way with me as a company? And does it drive better business outcomes for my business? If it doesn't do that, it doesn't really matter whether you call it UCaaS or CCaaS or CPaaS. It simply has to drive those better business outcomes. And that's the approach that we're taking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then again, talking about Nexmo, they are now 12, 18 months a part of Vonage now?
Almost 2 years. Okay. June 5th, it'll be 2 years.
What synergies have you seen since the acquisition up until today?
So we have done there's been a great deal of synergies because you mentioned before about the Venn diagrams where much of the industry has developed as if the segments, UCaaS, CCaaS, CPaaS, have been separate. We reject that. If they were all Venn diagrams, they all be separate. Our view is they're coming together all the time. So increasingly, the purchaser at a company, Acme company, is the line of business manager. The conventional wisdom used to be that if I'm buying UCaaS, I'm the CIO or the head of IT. And if I'm buying CCaaS, contact center, I'm the help center. And if I'm buying, communications platform as a service, I'm an individual developer, or perhaps even the CMO. What you're finding now is it's coming together as lines of business. Given that trend, from a synergy point of view, we've organized, since the acquisition, completely functionally, so that the entire engineering team, Vonage traditional or Nexmo, reports up to the same CTO. The product organization up to the same chief product officer. Sales under the same chief revenue officer, same with marketing. And they're already doing tremendous amounts of lead sharing within the groups, operational sharing, sales enablement, sales training, and things like that, Because what we're finding is that in the cloud PBX world, your salespeople don't want to go out there and go to a customer and say, buy me because my hunt group or my auto attendant is better than the other guys. Because this is very sort of baseline functionality. What you want to do is go into your customer and have a conversation about better business outcomes. So they're just naturally carrying Nexmo into the discussion with every prospect out there. You can look at every one of our large company wins. It began with a Nexmo conversation, interestingly, more than just the feature set of the PBX or the contact center. So you're seeing very, very natural synergies happen. Now, it's not a cost synergy issue for us in terms of people. When we bought Nexmo, it was about 175 people. I think it's above 300 today. And as I recall, last time when I was in our London office, there was 140 open jobs for Nexmo this calendar year. So we're growing in a big hurry.
Okay, so we talked about the cloud. We talked about APIs. There's another big buzzword these days around communications, and that's Teams.
Yep.
Okay, the notion of what Slack started in a way. Messaging inside groups, smaller groups, which is more ad hoc than the usual grounded, structured way of communications. And you see today Microsoft going there, Cisco going there, all of the big companies are headed there. And then next to it, you've got Google and Amazon joining this specific space.
Yes.
How is Vonage preparing towards that future of team collaboration, enterprise messaging, whatever you want to call it?
So, so not to sort of disclose all the goodies that are coming, but within our roadmap, we have some very, very interesting developments around the collaboration and workstream messaging space that will be coming out later this year. And that's tightly integrated as a single app, whether you're mobile, desktop, or browser, with the experience in the communication system. Now, it also will integrate well with the major players that you just talked about. A Slack, a Stride, Teams, Spark, et cetera, or excuse me, WebEx, et cetera, because it has to. No one's gonna play, in our view, we can't play kingmaker and say, oh, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, you cannot use these other collaboration tools. That's ultimately going to be the decision of the customer. So we have to have our own solution, which is built in a fully integrated way, but then the ability to integrate in with the others. And that's the approach that we're taking.
Okay. Can I ask a question that isn't part of the questions here that just occurred to me?
Sure.
What about contact centers?
I think contact center is incredibly important as part of the integrated solution. And if you think about, and so today we have contact center built in to Vonage Business Cloud, which is our own proprietary call processing stack. And for our Vonage Enterprise solution, we use BroadWorks contact center functionality. Then in those situations where they need an advanced contact center solution, then we are a reseller of InContact. But again, it's integrated fully in with our solution. So it appears like it's a single experience. And then we serve it as if it's a single experience. So the contract is on our paper, the support is ours, things like that. Contact center, though, becomes very, very important in the CPaaS market, because so much of how communications gets embedded in through some software API into that website, that mobile app, business process, what have you, is about customer experience. And so think of it as task routing. Somebody's on my website and they're looking at my product and they have a question. Today, they may pick up the phone and call and have to start over because there's no context to what they were doing on the website. And these CPaaS type tools are all about their contextual. The software identifies the context of what I was doing. So if I was on Delta Airlines site trying to book a flight and I was 10 minutes into booking the itinerary and all of a sudden I had a problem, In the past, I'd pick up the phone and just call and have to start over because no one had any idea of the itinerary I was just trying to book. These new contextual tools that you can embed in understand the itinerary so that it routes through the appropriate IVRs into the contact center. So think of it as a task, an intelligent task. It knows I was trying to book a flight from Tokyo to Shanghai next Thursday, and it'll route me through the appropriate IVRs to the person on the help desk for the international Asia markets. And so you can envision from a customer personalization or customer intimacy, rather than me having to start over, which is what happens today, which is very frustrating to all of us. You can imagine the agent picking the phone up and saying, "Hi, Mr. Masarek, I see you're trying to book a flight next Thursday from Tokyo to Shanghai. How can I help?" That's a direct connection between the customer experience routing the task into the contact center. We think that's very important.
Okay. Let's look a bit into the future.
Okay.
What do you think is the biggest challenge for the modern businesses moving forward from now on, when it comes to communications, of course?
I think I'm not sure it's a challenge. I don't want to sort of split words between challenge and opportunity, but I actually think communications is going to fundamentally change by virtue of we're no longer tethered to a physical device. We think about communications, I'm on a call, either a landline or this. In our vision for it, communications is in everything. So whether it is a click to call or click to communicate functionality in the website, or pick whatever app you want. You're on Salesforce, I'm on an Excel spreadsheet, someone else is in, G Suite or in Gmail or in Google Sheets, doesn't matter. There will be click to communicate functionality everywhere. So, and that's really these microservices that are going to be created increasingly by these CPaaS type solutions. So you're going to have, I think, this explosion in communications, the way I think about it, because you're no longer tethered to anything physical. You're in an app or a website or what have you. And the way I think about it is your decision of how you communicate is simply going to be a function of the limitations of the physical device that you got onto the internet with. So for instance, if the device doesn't have a camera, well, you're not going to do video. If it doesn't have a speaker and a microphone, you're only going to do messaging. That's all you can. But the mode, video, audio, or messaging, is going to be the limitations of the device and your personal preference. Also kind of situational. If you just step out of the shower, you're not going to do video, likely. So the point is, regardless of how you're interacting, in some sort of app or website, you're going to have communication everywhere. So I think the notion of the challenge to companies is less the challenge and more that I think it's going to change the way we work, because the notion of how we collaborate, how we share, the tightness of the communication is just going to, that sort of that feedback loop is going to get tighter and tighter and tighter, is the way I think about it. I actually think about communication, this renaissance or this explosion in communication, a little bit like the internet 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there was no video flying around the internet. It was kind of more flat files and such. There wasn't full motion video. There certainly wasn't, virtual reality and things like that, and self-driving cars and all this stuff that is just, massive quantities of data that are going around the internet. When that began, look what happened with all the content delivery networks. They just kind of went like this in terms of the volume of capacity that they handle on the internet. I think communications is going to go through this similar renaissance or explosion in a sense, because if communications are everywhere, not just on specific devices, you're going to be communicating all the time. And so I think you're going to see this, massive uplift in it. If it's a challenge out there, is it going to create sort of communication overload? Perhaps. But maybe smarter people than us will figure it out and how to make it simpler.
Mm-hmm. And moving forward, would businesses end up building their communication needs on top of APIs, go pick a UCaaS or a communication solution to do that for them, or go for even a very specific niche SaaS product to get what they need?
I think that increasingly communications will be built on top of the platform, the PaaS product, not going and buying some monolithic application. Like you said earlier, everybody's got APIs. Well, I can have, the old way we used to write software, we'd write a big monolithic solution from the UI, the user interface, all the way down to the metal, called PBX in our example. I can open up APIs to the PBX, but it's not programmable. It's simply an API into that monolithic solution. Where we sit today is a microservices architecture where it's fully programmable. And I think what you'll see, and this is exactly the strategy that we're building to, is whether you want to use that, that big chunk of microservices in a particular use case that is a big application like PBX or a big application like Contact Center. It's just a function of, what's the best way to deliver it to a customer. Do I think people are going to build their own PBX all the time? No, because I think to me it's analogous to the vast majority of people don't build their own computer. You certainly could. You could be a hobbyist and build your own PC and buy the motherboard and the chassis and the whole bit. But very few people do that when you go out and buy a computer for $400. So I think the PBX distribution model, where it's you're going to subscribe to it, it's a SaaS solution, will persist. But I think the microservices are really going to take over, where communications get woven into everything else.
Okay. Vonage in 5 to 10 years from now, where do you see the company itself? What are you going to sell to businesses, to consumers? What kind of services are going to be there?
So Vonage in the next 5 years will be an extraordinarily different company than it is today. Remember, let me go backwards first. 4 years ago, we were 100% consumer. Now, this year, in 2018, roughly 60% of the revenue is business. Business is growing really quickly. So as of last quarter, 22% growth organically, nothing to do with acquisitions. And consumer has been declining as residential home phone usage is in decline by 12%, roughly. Now that business is the larger of the two segments and growing at twice the rate that consumer is declining, you can imagine where the lines separate in a very big hurry. So the whole focus of the organization is on business. It already is. Consumer is still a meaningful piece. It's 40%, but it's getting smaller all the time as a percentage of the total. What's interesting from a how we're going to serve customers is precisely the way we do it today. Our whole approach from a platform perspective, the way I've described it, where irrespective of whether it's UCaaS, CCaaS, or CPaaS is coming out of a common platform, we will continue to execute on that. What's interesting, where I think a value unlock happens for the company, is you're now going to have we're already having consolidated revenue growth. Last year we did just above $1 billion in revenue. This year Wall Street has us close to $1.05 billion. Again, as the smaller piece, consumer, gets smaller and smaller, its mitigating impact on overall growth declines. Therefore, we're sort of more and more of a consolidated growth company. Again, unrelated to any acquisitions, just purely organically. The notion then of, oh my goodness, you're in the midst of a transformation goes away because you've now transformed. So where I can see us in pretty short order is serving our approach to our customers in this differentiated way, which I think, will withstand the test of time, will withstand competitive entrance, because at the end of the day, we're just rooted in how do we provide better business outcomes for our customers. But now you're going to have this, increasingly fast-growing, consolidated company, well greater than $1 billion in revenue, highly profitable still, and I think that's going to be a value unlock for the story. When I go back to many transformational stories in the early days, there's a lot of investor skepticism about transformational stories because most of them don't work. This one's worked, and that's why we've had sort of an almost quadrupling of our stock price over the last 4 years.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks for your time, Alan.
My pleasure. Thanks so much. I
Really
enjoyed it.
enjoyed it.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.